Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the fourth webinar in the TribalP2Action series, How to Prevent Pollution and Save Money from Energy Use at Tribal Businesses through Assessments, Planning, and Best Practices. So here's our cast of panelists today. Shasta Gaughan with the Pala Band of Mission Indians. She's the Environmental Director, and Tipo there. She will hopefully be joining us in a little bit, and but she may not be able to join us today, but she is the lead on this project, and I'll share more information about her and Paula in just a few moments. Jessica?
Thanks, Josh. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Counts Arnold, and I am prevention. I'm the Pollution Prevention Coordinator and Sustainable Materials Coordinator at US EPA Region 9. And we provide P2 assistance to local government, state organizations, and tribes. And I've had the pleasure of working with Pala on this project, and I'm excited about you learning more about what they've done. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, John, I muted you temporarily, but John Flores with San Pasqual. You're muted right now, John.
Can you hear me now, Josh?
Yep, you're good.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is John Flores. I'm the Environmental Director for the San Pasqual Band of Mission Indians. I'm also the Water Manager here, and it's good to be on this fourth webinar.
Thank you, John. I'm Josh Simmons with Prosper Sustainably. Prosper Sustainably is the lead consulting firm for this project, developing, implementing a lot of what you're going to see here, being supported by others who will introduce themselves. And I've been working with tribes in the energy space and environmental space for a while now, since 2007, actually longer. And in addition to working with Paula and some other tribes on P2 related projects, we're also now working with the state of California on their tribal energy gap analysis project. Prior to starting Prosper Sustainably, I was the environmental director for the San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians in Santa Barbara County, California. So the counterpart to John and Shasta for Paula and San Pasqual, and that's how I originally met them. Michael?
Hi, my name is Michael Burr. I'm the director of Microgrid Institute and also a principal consultant for Burr Energy LLC. We work with a lot of different tribes and communities on various types of energy projects, not surprisingly microgrids, but have been involved in a lot of community energy projects, including integrated renewable energy projects and other types of things that have led to pollution reductions. And hopefully today we'll be able to draw upon some of that experience to talk about the opportunities as well as pitfalls and strategies that tribes and other and tribal businesses can take to reduce pollution and save money through energy resource management.
Thank you, Michael. Brendan?
Hey, everybody. So my name is Brendan Hall. I'm the lead for our higher education program at the EnergyStar Buildings program and co-lead for our state and local work, which includes tribal outreach. So excited to share today our tool portfolio manager, that's sort of the backbone of our program, and provide sort of future support if there's any interest in doing more with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Brendan. And Scott?
Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Brown. I'm a senior scientist with Wood Environment and Infrastructure, formerly known as A. McFoster Wheeler. I have been doing a lot of the work with Paula and San Pasqual on the hazardous material and water aspects of this study. And so
Scott, you're frozen again. But I can finish up for Scott, and I think people across the U.S., particularly in California right now, are experiencing some broadband issues, particularly with our wildfires going on. out here. So Scott and Wood have been supporting this project, focusing on hazardous substances and water resources, and been an invaluable part of the team. And they were leading the webinars the last 2 weeks on those particular topics, and I encourage you to go back and review those. Okay, thank you, everybody. So we've completed our introductions, and what I'm hoping you can do is you can also introduce yourself in the chat box, share your organization, your location. If not, I'll share your position. And I'm gonna run a quick poll right now just to get a sense of who we have on the line in terms of your role with respect to energy pollution prevention related planning. So let me get that poll going right now. And I'm going to give about a minute for everybody to respond to that. So what is or are your roles in energy pollution prevention planning for tribal businesses or other organizations? And you may have more than one role. So take a few minutes or take a few seconds to respond to that, please. Okay, about 30 more seconds. Most of you have responded so far, and it does look like we have tribal government staff, mostly followed closely by government agency support. So thank you for completing that poll. I'll share the results so you can kind of get a sense of who all is here as well. So then I'm going to run through give an overview of the TribalP2 Action Project and in the virtual roundtable series if you're not familiar. The bulk of this webinar is going to focus on energy pollution prevention assessment and planning steps, and that will include an EnergyStar Portfolio Manager overview and demo conducted by Brendan. Following that, we will kind of discuss the Pala and San Pasqual case studies in a little more detail, and we'll wrap up with challenges and lessons learned, and then address any questions we have at the end. Although, if we see anything that's particularly relevant, we will address it at the time. I encourage you to submit your written questions throughout the webinar. There's both a chat and a Q&A feature, and Michael Burr and others will monitor those and raise those throughout the webinar at appropriate times. And if we don't get to it during the webinar, we'll definitely get to the end. And we'll even, if you'd like to speak, we'll allow you to ask your question directly. All right, so if this is your first time joining us, this is an 8-part series, online event series for the TribalP2 Action Project, and there have been 5 webinars focusing on different topics. This is the 4th webinar. We have our final webinar next week, which is going to be a little more general in nature, focusing on P2 training and implementation. Our final roundtable discussion is going to be this Thursday, and we're going to be focusing on energy storage at tribal businesses and how it relates to pollution prevention and how you can save costs there as well. So if you have not registered for any of these final events, please do so. And I continue to encourage you to share this information and this series with others. All of the webinars are being recorded. Some of the roundtables may be recorded as well and made available, but webinars 1 through 3 are currently on our website. And so you can go back and view those at any time and download the slides. The TribalP2 Action Project is an EPA grant-funded project with an EPA P2 pollution prevention grant. The grant was received by the Pala and Mission Indians, who are administering this project. And it's a collaboration between Pala, San Pasqual, the EPA, Prosper Sustainably, Microgrid Institute, Wood, the California Green Business Network, and others. And we appreciate everybody's contributions and the success of this project so far. There are 2 major components to this project. The initial component was focusing more on local P2 assessments and action planning, at Pala and San Pasqual businesses. So for Pala, we have the casino, spa, and resort, 5 different agribusinesses, including citrus and avocado groves and a vineyard, the Fox Motocross Raceway, an RV resort that's adjacent to the casino, as well as the gas station and mini mart that are at the same location as well. Pala's transfer station, the fleet department, which serves most, if not all, these businesses, and the tribe's wastewater treatment plant that serves both businesses, government facilities, and residences at Pala. At San Pasqual, they have a variety of business operations, but we chose to focus on the Woods Valley Golf Club for this particular project. As part of this, the local assessments and action planning, we are doing some employee training and green team type activities to increase awareness among employees at these businesses. And this particular webinar series is part of the National TribalP2 Training Capacity Building component of this project, which we have branded as the TribalP2Action Project. And you can visit our website at TribalP2Action.org for more information. So both Pala and San Pasqual are located in apparently halfway between Los Angeles and Tijuana, but in Northeast San Diego County, and you know, are kind of in the high fire arid areas right now. And I want to take a moment to, you know, kind of reiterate or refresh what is pollution prevention, because it's not a very common term. So pollution prevention is any practice that reduces, eliminates, or prevents pollution at its source. It can be thought of as environmental sustainability or greening. So if you hear about greening businesses, I think we're really talking about the same concepts. On the right of the slide is the hierarchy of environmental protection, which begins with pollution prevention. You want to reduce pollution at its source. And then if you can't do that, then you want to seek to then reuse, then recycle, then treat, and then as the final resort would be to dispose or release pollution. You can learn more about the EPA Pollution Prevention Program by visiting their website. I provided the link here, and in the very first webinar, Jessica went into more detail about the Pollution Prevention Program. And this particular webinar is focusing on energy, so I wanted to provide some energy-specific resources that you could go to and learn more about and share a hierarchy for energy. So the hierarchy for energy really starts with energy conservation or energy saving. You want to reduce your consumption as much as possible. Then you'd proceed to energy efficiency, whereas you're implementing measures or new systems, mechanical or otherwise, or typically mechanical, that are going to use less energy. After that, you then proceed to renewable energy sources. Following that, you would proceed, the next priority would be low emissions energy sources. And then finally, as a last resort, from an environmental standpoint, would be conventional fuels, such as fossil fuels. And some specific resources, and there are certainly many more, are EPA's EnergyStar program, and I provide the link here. And we will share more information about that in just a little bit. And also the Department of Energy Office of Indian Energy, they have a variety of resources, including funding and technical assistance, that you can go and find more about there. Webinar series, while it's focusing on tribal businesses, it really, the concepts we're talking about are applicable to any business or organization, tribal or not. So, you know, if you are not part of a tribal business or serving a tribal business, then you should gain as much value from what we're sharing, just maybe not from these tribal specific funding and other resources that we mentioned here. Before we dive into the P2 planning process focusing on energy use and conservation, I just want to provide an overview of the Tribal P2 planning process. We went into this general P2 planning process in depth in the very first webinar, so I encourage you to go back and review that webinar if you are unable to attend, or if you want a refresher. But generally, we need to start off by selecting the target businesses or facilities. Following that, we want to establish the key relationships in the core P2 planning team, getting the key stakeholders on board. Then we want to determine the P2 goals and objectives, the media areas and performance metrics we're targeting through these efforts. Keep in mind that this is an iterative process, so as you begin to refine your scope, that may change some of the key stakeholders you want to involve in this process. The next step is gathering information and data, then identifying pollution prevention opportunities that could be implemented at the target business or facility. Once you have those opportunities, you're going to prioritize and select which opportunities you are going to dive deeper into, and then you'll actually conduct that advanced analysis and planning for those priority opportunities. You'll take those findings, present those results to those key stakeholders and leaders to hopefully get support for proceeding. And you'll want to write this all up in an assessment report to ensure you're documenting your findings and go back to them. And finally, well, not finally, I guess it's probably maybe the jumping off point for actually achieving pollution prevention and cost savings is developing your P2 action plan, where you're going to lay out the strategy for implementing those opportunities that you've identified, and certainly encourage this to be an iterative, a living document that you can continuously update as you learn more information, as you implement opportunities, so you can move on to the next opportunities. Today's webinar is going to focus on, it's going to run through this planning process, but focusing on energy use specifically throughout. All right, so the very first step I mentioned before was selecting the target businesses and facilities. And for this project, we already have a series of businesses that we're focusing on that I already went over. You know, I mean, I think the very primary thing here is, you know, really starting with the highest energy use and or highest energy cost facilities. So, you know, this, as I mentioned, it may be an iterative process as you first initially identify which facilities could be part of the scope of your pollution prevention assessment and planning process. Then you'll start gathering the data, the energy data for these facilities, and you'll get the usage data, and then at the same time, hopefully getting the cost data. And I think the kind of highest energy users are going to rise to the top pretty quickly and easily. I would say, you know, if you have to choose, you have limited resources, limited time, certainly focus on those ones with the highest energy use and highest energy cost. You know, there's a lot and many more factors that go into this, including access to data, information, relationships, you know, what's going to provide the most low-hanging fruits. I guess as an example, as we're focusing on businesses here, at Pala, the businesses themselves have actually done a lot of energy measures already. On the government side, there haven't been as many energy measures implemented. In particular, the tribal administration building is a fairly high energy user and has not had a lot of energy attention because they don't have a facilities manager there. So, you know, at Pala, we're actually doing broader energy-related planning activities, and that is kind of one of our priorities, where we see some really low-hanging fruit opportunities for some energy investments that are going to have relatively quick payback. So, you know, I'm going to pose to you, you know, I think this is an opportunity for you to consider, if you haven't already, what facilities do you think you want to target or could target, and then refine that after you gather the data. And then I'm also going to do a quick poll as well. I'd like you to share your biggest energy challenge to us, just so we can get a sense of what's really holding you back. And so I've launched that poll, and then as you're filling that out, Michael, I want to also ask you, you know, any other considerations you want to add to this particular step?
Well, I know it's something we're going to get into more a little later, but I wanted to bring up the point about taking a comprehensive approach. You touched on it a little bit, but, you know, one of the things about energy and electricity in particular is that, you know, it's kind of a unique resource or service in that so many other functions, practically all other functions, depend on electricity. So changes you make in that area can have rippling effects throughout many different functions and infrastructure. So for that reason alone, it's really important to step back and take a really strategic approach when you're looking at your options and opportunities and, you know, what you want to implement. But also by taking a comprehensive approach and really being systematic and strategic about it, you can make sure that the investments that you make, you know, are the most optimal, and that you're not shooting yourself in the foot. And I think we'll be able to get into that a little bit later about how, you know, pollution prevention opportunities can be achieved to the benefit of other services, but they also can be achieved in ways that can be to the detriment of other opportunities. So it's really important to have a careful planning approach.
Thank you, Michael. And then, so the poll, we need Shasta and her screaming goat. If you've been on our other prior webinars, that usually gets people's attention. We're only getting about 50% or so response on some of these polls, but not entirely unexpected. The top two challenges in terms of proceeding with energy-related pollution prevention activities are insufficient leadership or management support and lack of expertise. This is definitely a more highly technical area, but there are certainly resources to be able to shortcut it, what we'll be sharing today. So let me share the results. And so, I think it's pretty obvious at Pala what the highest energy usage facility is. So this is a picture of the Pala Casino. And we'll talk about more, how you're going to go further into that process. At San Pasqual, we are focusing on the Woods Valley Golf Course, Golf Club. Part of that is the relationship that the tribal government and John have with Woods Valley. They have a casino as well that tends to have separate management. And then, I think in terms of outside of tribal businesses, we're focusing a lot of efforts on the tribal government complex that has a variety of facilities. On the government side, the highest energy users there. John, you want to add anything about selecting the facilities over at San Pasqual?
Hi. Yeah, we're working with the golf course. Luckily, we've had a pretty good relationship with the group that operates the golf course and manages the golf course. There, you would think, how does energy correlate with a golf course? And that was a question we got early on. And one thing you might want to think about, obviously, is all the golf carts are electrical, right? So they're plugging those in every day and every evening to charge those. And then also water. And how does water correlate with electricity? Well, you need pumps to move water around the golf course and to push water around. So, other than their highest utility was purchasing water, but just underneath that was energy use to get, water moving around, to charge the golf carts, and to, their little clubhouse. So, a lot of people wouldn't think of a golf course as a high energy user, but it actually was. So they were excited to work with us on this project and see how we could, potentially lower their energy bill.
Yeah, and there's certainly a water energy nexus there with some of the opportunities that we're looking into can address both of those particular needs and save both water costs and energy costs, as well as reduce pollution in those areas. So the next key step is establishing key relationships, and then you want to involve those that are going to be impacted, those that are going to have key inputs, those that are going to be making decisions. But also want to consider who's the core P2 planning team, who's going to really be who's going to champion these efforts, who's going to actually move them forward and bring the information that's needed to leadership and other key stakeholders. In the energy arena in particular, I think the business manager certainly, or whoever is leading whatever particular facility, is going to need to be involved in those decisions. At the tribe, it's always likely going to involve tribal council. Sometimes there's a separate, if you're talking about some commercial operations, sometimes there's an economic development corporation or tribal council that you'll also want to need to involve in this process. I think the most important are going to be the facilities manager and staff in terms of actually understanding and pursuing these opportunities, identifying them, and then actually implementing them. It's important to also consider transportation in this analysis. So, when we say energy, a lot of times people are just kind of thinking of buildings and electricity, but transportation fuels, gasoline, diesel, other fuels are significant and certainly a large part of our energy use in this country. I also added here the finance department for a few reasons. I think the primary reason that comes to mind is that they tend to be the gatekeepers of the energy information. And this is probably relevant to the other areas as well, getting procurement records if you're talking about hazardous substances, or getting water bills. And those water bills are going to show your water usage. But getting access to the electricity bills, the gas or oil bills, the fuel bills, any energy-related procurement on those bills are typically going to have the usage data on them as well. You may also need to work with them to get access to the portals for the utilities that are going to provide more detailed data that you're going to want and need to do an analysis, and I'll share a bit more information about that in a moment. So, you know, I encourage you to think who should you involve in your Energy P2 planning with some of this in mind. And Michael, I guess who else would you add that I haven't mentioned?
You know, I think you hit the core of it for sure. I think there's something to be said about community engagement, though, especially to the degree these initiatives and objectives may involve broader community values and longer-term projects and goals for the community. You know, to the degree that we're interrelated with green space development or community-wide energy savings or renewable energy programs. It's a good idea to consider, you know, who are the kind of the champions in the community, the people that you really need to start engaging with, maybe not immediately at the outset, but as soon as you start establishing what your goals are, if there are community impacts, it's a good idea to open up channels of communication with community leaders, I guess I would say.
Thank you, Michael. And then John, was there any other, you know, kind of positions we haven't mentioned that were kind of have been key to your energy planning over at San Pasqual?
No, I think that pretty much covers all of it. I can't really think of anything else I would recommend on, you know, stakeholders to be involved. That's pretty much everyone that I think we've worked with in the past.
Okay, thanks. Okay, and then this is actually from the Pala Fleet Department. You know, there are certainly a lot of energy use going on there. I didn't have any great pictures from my site visit over there, but this is an air conditioning recharging system that actually services hybrids as well. So I thought there's a little bit of an energy nexus there. But you know, I wanted to kind of raise the Pala Fleet Department here because they've been key because they actually serve all these businesses, all these facilities, both government and commercial. Are bringing their vehicles and having their vehicles serviced by the fleet department. So they're, in terms of making transportation related impacts, they're, you know, a very key stakeholder in that and can have some insights that we're going to need to be successful in implementing these initiatives moving forward. Okay, the next step is going to be determining your energy pollution prevention goals, objectives, scope, and metrics. I mean, this is really about scoping your project and identifying what is driving it. So, you know, kind of first, like what are your possible energy goals and objectives for the business? And I've listed a few kind of pretty common goals and objectives here. Certainly lowering energy use, but I think everything else kind of flows from that. Saving money, reducing emissions, switching to renewable energy sources and reducing conventional energy sources. There's green marketing that you can be doing and public relations activities that can leverage these types of activities if you're particularly successful. There can be health and safety impacts, benefits both on site and then just broadly off site to when you're relying upon more renewables and less fossil fuels. I think some, you know, kind of key ones that are, well, resilience is an emerging one. I think it's a new term that you haven't, you know, 5 years ago, you really wouldn't hear that much. But in terms of being able to withstand the types of environmental events that are occurring right now, whether it's wildfires, droughts, floods, storms, hurricanes, but having energy sources that are going to be reliable and continue to serve your needs. In the tribal space, in particular, self-sufficiency, so a tribe being able to have its own energy generation assets, and then having these initiatives support tribal sovereignty as well in its governance. And I'll come back to, well, actually, you know, John, do you have any particular ones you want to add? I mean, we've kind of gone through these for the microgrid project over there for the tribal government complex, and I think this covers all the ones we've mentioned so far. But any other ones you want to add to this list that I didn't, or that are relevant to San Pasqual?
No, like I said, Josh, we went through a lot of this on the microgrid project already, and so I think that's a pretty robust and complete list that you got there. Yeah, I can't really think of anything at the time right now.
Okay, thanks, John. And then Michael, I feel like you're going to have something to add to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to make a fine point here about something we've seen a lot. And it goes to what I was saying before about how interdependencies really come up when you start talking about electricity in particular. So we've seen a fair number of tribes and other communities that have, early on, have wanted to make improvements in their energy resources, their costs, their, environmental footprint, and to take advantage of opportunities to install solar in particular, but also other renewable energy resources. And that's great, of course. But what we've seen is that in the process of that, there's been an awful lot of investment that has gone into remote net metered solar systems. Just as a really quick recap, a lot of people on the phone probably know what remote net metering is, but if you don't, just the point is that net metering is the idea that if you're generating solar electricity, when you are overproducing, it's pushing out onto the grid, and then when you're underproducing or you're not producing solar, then you're taking electricity from the grid, and at the end of the month or at the end of the billing period, it gets netted out or evened out so that your sales are credited toward your overall bill. You can do that in a way that's remote so that that solar resource is not located at your facility behind your meter, and it may be located somewhere a long way away. And that's great. It's been a really good economic benefit, and it has served to get a lot of solar generating asset in particular out there in the field. However, when you do that kind of thing, what happens is you wind up dedicating your load to that generation, and then you can't use that generation during an outage because it's not behind your meter. It's located somewhere else. The power that's being produced by it cannot serve your loads. So that becomes a problem. That's a situation where, you kind of are shooting yourself in the foot in a way by investing in a resource that is not resilient. So this gets to that word that Josh was, emphasizing about resiliency. It's part of an interdependency, complex of issues around electricity that can prove really important, especially now as we're seeing, real serious threats to the grid and the stability of the grid in California and in the Pacific Northwest and other places as well. People that have put a lot of their eggs in one basket, that being a remote net metered generation source, are kind of wishing they hadn't done that in some situations now. So this just goes to the point about really taking a comprehensive strategic planning approach so that you understand what all of your goals are and where the priorities lie, and so that you can go in with eyes open and that you are investing in assets to achieve all of your goals in the best way that you can. You can't necessarily be perfect in every way, right? And there's no one silver bullet solution that solves all your problems, but at least knowing, hey, I'm investing in a solar resource that's reducing my environmental footprint and saving money, but now I'm kind of stuck when it comes to an outage. I'm going to have to just rely on diesel or something. You have to consider those kinds of things when you go into this kind of planning. That was just one key point I wanted to make. One thing before I shut up, I wanted to mention in particular, when we talk about energy pollution prevention, the emphasis tends to be on displacing grid or fossil fueled electricity. Grid power historically being mostly fossil powered. Over time, that's changing, and so it's important to look at that on a life cycle basis, that the carbon footprint of the grid is not going to be the same in 10 years or 20 years as it is today. So it's important to think about things on a life cycle basis. And I also wanted to mention, as sort of a counterpoint to that, in a way, if you're in an area now where there's a lot of, like, all of your electricity is coming from fossil fuels, it may be in some situations better for you to consider, if you don't have a great access to renewable energy or solar or other renewables, it may be, you may be able to still achieve substantial pollution reductions by going to combined heat and power, or even on a community or a tribal basis to look at district heating and cooling. By using fossil fuels in a much more cost-effective and an efficient way, you can actually achieve pollution prevention through combined heat and power and district heating and cooling, where you've got a local generation resource that's much more efficient than having separate sources of electricity and thermal energy. And you generate it locally, use it locally. That cuts out a lot of the losses that are in the system, as well as just achieves a more efficient outcome overall. So I guess I just wanted to make that point, that pollution prevention isn't just about moving away from grid power or fossil power to renewables, where you can make a lot of benefit and change in that direction, of course, by doing that. But also there's benefits to be had by, adopting, first of all, as, I think Josh mentioned, saving energy where you can, being more efficient and smart about using energy to start with. And that also goes to the point of potentially using combined heat and power to achieve a, lower emitting, more efficient combined thermal and electric resource.
Thank you, Michael. And actually, as you were talking, another kind of potential goal came up that I would mention too. I think, supporting the local economy, whether it's creating jobs or economic revenues or for the tribe or the tribal community, I think are important considerations, and considerations that we had as part of the San Pasqual microgrid project as well. We initially tried to have a solar installation training component to it. And we continue to look for those opportunities as well.
Can I add one key point on that? Actually, it's a great point.
Sure.
I'm glad you brought up. When you're generating your own energy, especially from renewables, and you own that generating resource, even if it costs the same amount of money, that money is staying in the community, in the tribe, as opposed to going down a power line to some power plant hundreds of miles away. So that's it's really a key point to consider, that to the degree that you can move ownership of generating resources local, that's a benefit you're going to gain for the community. It's going to keep the economics stronger locally in the community.
Yeah, good point, Michael. And but also the counterpoint to that is, with great power comes great responsibility, and that's a consideration too. I'm working separately with the Rincon tribe on a series of microgrids throughout their community, and it's a balance. I mean, if you assume those responsibilities, then you could be responsible for the poles, you could be responsible for the lines, and you may or may not want to assume those responsibilities, or there really may not be the economies of scale to make it cost effective. So there's a bit of a balance as you're considering these goals. I think that's part of the process. A bit later in the process is, as you're prioritizing, what you're doing is you're applying these goals to the different options you find, and being able to balance and evaluate which ones really make the most sense for your community. Ideally, you're going to have ones that are achieving all of your goals, but in other cases, you're going to have a give and take where achieving one goal is going to be at the expense of another potentially equally important goal. But that's what this whole planning process is all about. So to wrap up this slide, what I think the scoping process is, what opportunities are you going to include in your assessment and planning process? What energy sources, and I would encourage all of them, whether it's electricity, gas, propane, oil. But do you want to include transportation or not? It may be easier just to focus on buildings and operations first, and then move on to transportation. I find that sometimes getting better data and transportation could be a little more challenging. And relationships, again, are kind of a key to proceeding and getting enough information on those. Considering the types of energy uses, whether it's building, transportation, industrial, agricultural. We already talked about the nexus between water and energy, which primarily is related to water pumping. And then the various energy strategies, which we already talked about in that hierarchy. I did see a question I think you already addressed from Carol and E regarding mechanisms such as batteries for use during future outages, and there definitely are energy storage. I would say there's more eco-friendly backup power options and less eco-friendly ones. You have generators, diesel generators, propane generators, which are going to be less eco-friendly. They're going to have more environmental impacts and potentially more costs to you as well, where you could consider storage opportunities. And we're going to actually be diving into that topic in a lot of depth coming up on Thursday. So I encourage anybody who wants to learn more about energy storage to join us on Thursday. I'm going to launch a quick poll real quick.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Would it make sense for us to talk just briefly about how energy storage actually is a pollution prevention technology?
Sure. So I'm launching a poll right now just to identify, hoping you can share with us your energy-related pollution prevention topics that you're most interested in. And yeah, Michael, why don't you briefly, so we can get to the next slide. And we actually need to give Brendan enough time to go through EnergyStar. He has to leave at 11.
Okay, just really quick then. Energy storage can certainly be used to reduce pollution. The way that it achieves that really is two primary ways. One is by simply storing cleaner energy to be used later. So if you have a solar resource, for example, and you are overproducing, rather than just pushing that out onto the grid, you can store it in your batteries or some other energy storage mechanism, because it's not only about batteries. And then you can utilize that energy later when you're not producing solar energy to displace grid power. So that's the obvious thing. The other thing is that you can use batteries as a demand or peak shifting mechanism so that you're moving in effect when you are using grid power. So let's say you don't have any solar generation, you can still use batteries to reduce your environmental footprint, because during some periods of the day, during peak demand periods, the pollution that's being produced to generate that power is actually higher on a kilowatt basis than it is during off-peak periods. So if you can reduce the amount of peak energy that you're using, and then instead, draw upon your battery storage, and then later when it's more environmentally friendly power to be charging your batteries with, that's a way to shift, in effect, the electricity around so that you are using less polluting electricity. And then we could also talk about electric cars, but I think that's another subject, probably beyond what Carolyn was asking about.
Yeah, and we'll get in more depth about all these and be able to have a more detailed discussion regarding that. So thank you, Michael.
Hey,
so
Josh.
this is just, yep. Hey, John.
Hey, Josh, can I just add one more thing that I thought of real quick that I just want to mention to the group? Because you brought up, water and energy nexus, basically. I think one thing that people don't realize it's pretty low-hanging fruit for energy conservation and water conservation is adding water meters. Just because if you don't have water meters in on your buildings, you don't know if you have a leak. And if you have leaks, that means you're running more energy to pump water that's just being wasted. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone. It helps you, find potential water leaks and also helps save energy so your pumps aren't constantly turning on to supply water that's just being wasted in a leaky toilet or in the ground. So it's, one thing that people always associate water meters is just conserving water, but also helps conserve energy as well.
Thanks, John. And people tend to be more mindful when they can see how much water they're using and what's associated with the cost. And then sub meters too. If you have pumps that are metered for energy, that can be useful as well. But the water meters will help. This is a picture from the Pala transfer station, and just kind of considering where some equipment opportunities. So there's, I guess, transportation on the left, a forklift. That's a propane one. We could be considering alternatives to the propane. That may be the most efficient way. And then there's a baler on the right. So it's about going in these facilities and identifying the large energy users and identifying alternatives to maybe it's a retrofit or maybe it's a replacement for that equipment.
Josh,
okay,
can I
so
just chime in
again,
really quick on this?
Sure.
This point?
So I want to give Brendan. Sorry, Michael. Maybe toward the end you can redo this. I want to make sure that Brendan has enough time to go through EnergyStar, and I gave him up to 15 minutes, and he basically is at that point. Thanks, Michael. The next kind of key step is gathering information and data. Your key data sources are for buildings and facilities are going to be, as I mentioned before, your energy bills, but you're really probably going to want to get more detailed energy usage data, sometimes at the 15-minute level, the 1 hour level, where it's showing what your energy usage is throughout a day. You can start to see patterns and how you could kind of shift your loads or address things like peaks that really can save you more money. On transportation, you're probably looking at fuel bills, possibly mileage records. It's important with all of this to go back and see what you've already done, what you've already studied, what you've already implemented. Those are often a good starting point. You can build upon those. Those usually have good information data, tell you who's been involved in these types of activities as well. And you really need to talk to your facilities and transportation managers and staff. As you're beginning to gather this information, it's important to be collecting and organizing it in a manner that you can track it and compare it on an ongoing basis. If you didn't track it, you can't report it. It's as if it didn't happen, at least to the leadership and decision makers. I recommend using a tool such as EnergyStar Portfolio Manager and/or spreadsheets to be able to track this type of data. I want to turn over to Brendan right now, who's going to give us an overview of EnergyStar Portfolio Manager and do a bit of a walkthrough. So take it away, Brendan.
Thanks, Josh.
I got to pull up your slides. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Well, it's good to be connected with everyone, and I just want to give sort of a high-level intro to the tool in our program. So if we go to the next slide. So Portfolio Manager is a tool that EPA developed that was launched in 1999, and it's really built on the foundation that good management is good information. So we started with energy tracking, sort of to the point of getting data sorted out and starting down the path of management. We saw this world where energy tracking and management wasn't really widely practiced. There wasn't much standardization to it. So we designed this tool to help fill that gap, and something that was focused sort of on the building owners and managers, not something that is for reporting to EPA. So this is a voluntary program at EPA. We provide free tools and resources that are private and secure to use. But anyway, so we then added water tracking in 2006 and waste tracking in 2016 to sort of build out the trifecta of energy, water, and waste management. If you go to the next slide. And our tool is really, it has a few different purposes, but some of the things you can do include comparing your building to a national sample of similar buildings. And I'll talk more about some of our key metrics that you can get out of the tool after you enter your data. You can also compare similar buildings to each other. So within your portfolio of buildings, say you have 10 different buildings, you can see which ones are performing better and which ones are performing worse if they're of a similar type. And that's sort of on the next point, which is really targeting underperformers for improvement. So my boss, who's been around at EPA for a long time, a lot longer than I have, but she likes to talk about Portfolio Manager as sort of like the Fitbit of energy management, meaning that it's sort of an entry point tool. It's really meant to get you started down the path of doing more, and but it does have powerful capabilities. So it's just sort of like the very basic start. What should we focus on? What buildings aren't doing as well as we think they should be? We go to the next slide. So in terms of those broader set of functionalities, you can both look at portfolio-wide performance and individual building. Identify problems by looking at monthly trends, and then as you take efforts to improve your buildings, you can see the impact in your energy, water, and waste metrics. So it's sort of an all-in-one tool that you can use for those different media. Next slide, please. Thanks. So on the management side, I feel like some of these slides are a little redundant, but in addition to energy and water and waste, you can also track your green power purchases. create custom reports. So if you want to set up sort of a regular report on metrics that you care about, then you can do that. You can also share and/or report data with others or to others. And then Portfolio Manager is also the tool where you apply for EnergyStar certification, which is a free recognition for EPA for top performing buildings. And I'll explain more sort of on what basis we have that recognition. So extra redundant here, we have metrics sort of across the board on in those three different categories of energy, water, and waste. So intensity metrics, where you're looking at usage over square footage of a building. We also have sort of weather normalized metrics on the energy use side. And then in terms of the EnergyStar score, that's sort of our bread and butter metric. That is a percentile ranking that is available for many types of buildings and shows where you fall against similar buildings nationwide on energy performance. So it's meant to be sort of a fair way for you to see how your building, given its type and other use details, compares with similar buildings. And the score of 50 is right in the median. A score of 75 or higher qualifies it in many cases for EnergyStar certification. And then we also have a bunch of metrics for greenhouse gas emissions. So you can track those as well in the tool. Next slide, please. So I mentioned it before, but the EnergyStar score was really idealized as a simple metric that was understood by everybody. So it's not just for your use, but if you want to report sort of up the management chain or publicly, it's a clear sort of sense or rating system that we developed, and we're all familiar with scores in school, sort of grades from 0 to 100. So this is our sort of take on that. Go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned a little earlier, but not all property types are eligible for 1 to 100 scores. Any building can be benchmarked in the tool. It's just that we have models that we use to develop our scores on, and the data that those models use isn't available for all types of buildings. So we have these scores available for all the property types on the screen, but other ones we don't have. However, that doesn't mean you can't use the tool. We fully encourage you to still use the tool, and we get a lot of usage sort of beyond scoreable types, but those are the types that can get scores. You can also get scores. A common misconception is that mixed use buildings, say if it's like a mix of office and warehouse, those can't get scores, but in fact they can. We do have some levels you have to hit in terms of at least 75% of the floor area or square footage of the building needs to be scoreable, and at least half of the building needs to be of a certain scoreable type. So those are just a little in the weed there, but next slide, please. So as mentioned, when you score 75 or higher, many types of buildings, if you can get a score, you can apply for free recognition from EPA. So there's no cost to earn the recognition, and we'll send you sort of a plaque that you can put up on your building. The one catch is that it has to be verified by a licensed professional, either an engineer or an architect, but that can be an in-house engineer or architect if you have someone on staff. So next slide, please. So really quickly at a high level, to get started in the tool, you'll need information about basic information about your building, like its address, the square footage. You'll need to have at least 12 months of consumption data for the resources you want to track. Like if it's energy use, you'll need to have 12 months of full data for that building for all fuel types. And then some information about the usage, like operating hours and number of computers or number of workers. And those fields only affect EnergyStar scores, not other metrics, and they sort of differ from one property to the next. Because as I mentioned, we have different models that are predicting what your usage should be based on what are the drivers in different property types, and those variables align with those different drivers. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in getting started, this website, energystar.gov/portfolio manager, is where you can create a username and password and log in, sort of your one-stop shop. And I had planned a live demo, but I think in the interest of time, I'll have to drop off. But I think there's still a couple more slides. We can skip over the demo. So in terms of how you get data in the tool, there are 3 different ways. Manual entry is just like it sounds, sort of fat fingering in, entering your usage information, your meter entries, for example. Then we also have spreadsheet uploads for single buildings as well as for your portfolio. So 2 options there. Like if you have a lot of buildings you're trying to enter at once, there's a set of spreadsheets that are step by step, and you can enter all that information in at once and get it uploaded quickly. We also have a growing number of companies that have connections to the tool through what's called web services, and that's both companies that typically charge a fee for the service they're providing, as well as utilities, a growing number of energy utilities across the country that provide a free sort of connection to the tool where they can push your energy use data directly into your account after you connect with them. Okay, so I'm going to skip the demo, and then if you're interested in learning more, we have a landing page here that is energystar.gov/building/training, and that has all of our all of our training resources, including guides, live webinars, and short videos that show you how to do more complicated things or things that come up a lot. And then I'll mention we have a regular series of trainings that go in sequential order, 101, 201, and 301. So if you're interested in boning up, we have those both live and recorded, but you could sign up for the live series, and in just a few weeks, after 3 hours, you'd be an expert, probably no more than I do. So next slide. We also have sort of on-demand support, including an FAQ site that's copied here, and you can send a question to us if you can't find the answer. But it's a pretty, given sort of the use of our tool and how broad that is, we have a pretty good set of FAQs, as well as a live Ask the Expert session that we hold, I believe, on a bi-weekly basis. So if you had burning questions that you wanted to get answered, you want to talk to someone directly, you could get that done. So if you go to the next slide. So this is, I think, the second to last slide. I just wanted to copy. We have this 2-pager we put together. I mentioned I support state and local governments as well as colleges and universities, but for this on the state and local side, and I think that extends to tribal for sure, we can help with sort of a suite of things, including benchmarking your buildings if you have questions on how to get that done in the tool. There's also a growing trend of sort of states and local governments using the tool to develop programs that affect all of the buildings in their jurisdiction. So if you have an interest in using that, it could be voluntary or mandatory, like a competition. We have resources that are tailor-made for those other types of programs. And that I don't know if these slides will be sent around, but that link there sort of goes through a lot of the common types of support that we can offer. And this last slide just has our contact information. That's my colleague who helps support on the state and local side and tribal. So I appreciate you reaching out if you have any interest, and thanks for your time.
Hey, Brendan, real quick before you go, I just want to, emphasize, because it definitely was raised as a concern, I think, from tribal government standpoint, and the concerns about privacy and data. that this is not public data. Entering it into EnergyStar Portfolio Manager does not give others access to it. But is there anything else you want to share about that, Brendan?
No, I mean, I'll mention that even EPA won't look at your data, so it's completely, it's your account. You can share it if you want to, but EPA wouldn't even look at the data only if you needed support and you wanted us to sort of log in. We have an admin view, but yeah, it's completely private and secure. So and it doesn't, we don't look at the data, you know, individually or in aggregate. So.
Great. Yeah, excellent information, Brendan. And I think it's, you know, very, very relevant to what we're talking about here. And we're going to be using EnergyStar Portfolio Manager for some of the facilities that we're working on for Pala and San Pasqual. But thank you very much for your time. Yeah, of course. Thank you. And please be in touch. Great, thanks. And so as I mentioned, the slides will be posted on our website afterwards. So, and then Brendan's contact information is here, and you can feel free to reach out to him and learn more. Okay, so getting back to here, I'll kind of move on to the next slide. I think there's certainly other data sources, but we have a half an hour left, so I want to continue to kind of efficiently move through this process. And this is a picture of Fox Raceway. So I mentioned it's a motocross raceway at Pala, and in this case, the energy we're looking at, we have utility information or utility data from SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric. I think a limited amount of propane, I believe, is used on site, particularly for cooking and possibly some heating as well. One of their major energy uses is pumping water, groundwater, and also then driving and spreading that water all over the track. So I think there's transportation fuel that needs to be considered as well. So this picture right here on the left is one of the parts of the water pumping infrastructure. And then on the right, kind of another energy usage, which would be, you'd be able to get more information on whether or not it's an appropriate level or not, is an HVAC system. So you look at your SDG&E data, your electricity data to see whether or not you have an efficient enough HVAC system. And in terms of the buildings there, I think HVAC is probably going to be their major use at those facilities. All right, so I think, a lot of what we're going to talk about is actually these opportunities here. So then the kind of next step, what we're trying to arrive at is identifying the pollution prevention opportunities in energy and beyond. So some of them are, as you're gathering this energy data, you may identify some opportunities that aren't necessarily going to save you energy, but are still worthwhile. You want to explore and communicate. Any way you can save these businesses money, they're going to be happy. You're going to gain their trust and support by doing that. So just kind of a few examples of areas or ways to identify these. And we're talking about kind of a preliminary assessment process right now. We're just kind of trying to identify all possible opportunities. We're not trying to go into too much depth about evaluating them. We want to get everything up there before we do that kind of more in-depth analysis. But some of these options will involve some level of depth. You could have energy-related audits performed at your facilities. You can pay for those. Sometimes they're free. They can be offered through your utilities or others. Contractor bids can be a valuable source of information. Typically, you're looking at getting systems maintained or potentially replaced periodically, and they'll provide a variety of options. Contractors who are interested in installing new energy-related systems will typically come out and do an evaluation and provide this information. You want to use this not too much. You don't want to kind of overtax the contractors and the level of work they have to do if they're not going to actually get any business from you. But it is a really good source of information that you also need to look at with a grain of salt, knowing that they are trying to get your business. Your past initiatives, I already mentioned, being a great source of information. Outside planning documents and other resources can be, including clearinghouses, can be very valuable. What have other facilities done? What have other governments, other tribal governments done, other local governments done in these areas? You can a lot of times download their energy planning studies and other documents and identify their strategies, what they evaluated, what was worked for them and what didn't. And you can even reach out to those other businesses, other organizations directly and ask them about what worked well for them and what didn't. You can get technical assistance. Tribes are eligible for technical assistance through the Department of Energy and BIA, who will do limited amount of energy-related TA to evaluate various opportunities. State and local agencies sometimes have technical assistance opportunities, and then utilities offer audits. Your utility may offer audit programs and other technical assistance support to help you better understand and evaluate opportunities as well. I put a few tools up here, which are probably more on the kind of renewable energy storage side of things. In terms of, SAM is the federal government's NREL tool to look into various energy-related projects, energy generation typically, but energy storage as well, and it can consider microgrids. Energy Toolbase is another kind of evaluation tool focusing on renewable energy and storage. Helioscope is a tool to evaluate solar projects and resources. Homer is specifically for microgrid-related evaluations, and then we just had Brendan on here who went through EnergyStar Portfolio Manager, which I think is an excellent tool to use to be able to get a better understanding of where your energy usage is and how you compare it to other facilities, both within your portfolio, but also comparing your facility to other facilities across the country and even potentially, state as well. So, I kind of pose to you, how do you identify energy opportunities? If there's anything that I haven't mentioned here you think is particularly valuable, I encourage you to enter into the chat box and share it with all of us. Michael, what other kind of, I would say, very key ones? We could go through a very long list here of different resources that you can do to identify opportunities, but, are there kind of one or two you really feel like we really need to mention?
Yeah, I did want to mention one, and that is, and it dovetails really closely with what Brendan was saying. There are a lot of tools, and the tools are getting a lot more sophisticated now for people to really get a very clear sense, a granular idea of what their energy use looks like and what appliances, what systems are using energy. There are, systems you can install that just watch your energy use behind the meter and can tell you very specifically what kinds of, systems are using energy at what time of day. That can be very powerful information that can be used, first of all, for, planning your energy improvements, but also on an ongoing basis to just monitor your energy use and to help make sure that you're not overusing energy, period, but also, using it in the most optimal way at the time periods of day when it's available and cleanest and cheapest.
Thanks, Michael. And then I kind of covered this already in the info gathering step, but you definitely, your priority should actually be speaking to the facilities managers, whoever is involved in managing the facilities that are using the energy, the vehicles that are using energy. They should be your first stop because there likely has been some level of evaluation that's occurred. They've probably identified certain opportunities that they think would be efficient or, they would like to see implemented. And I find too, a lot of times, they can struggle in doing the analysis or presenting the information that's needed to get support. Whereas if you're able to run the numbers and better articulate and demonstrate the benefits, then you can be an asset to them. They'll see you as somebody who can actually get them support and investment in various opportunities and initiatives that they already had on the radar and want to see implemented. And we're finding that through all these facilities, but in particular over at San Pasqual at the Woods Valley Golf Club, the GM over there and the facilities manager already have different opportunities that they've identified, and sometimes it's a lack of expertise, and sometimes it's just a lack of time. I mean, they're very busy in doing just operating the facility on an ongoing basis. It's difficult for them to spend the time actually running the analysis. They need to show what is the financial return, or what are the environmental savings, what are the other benefits associated with the particular opportunities. And so, they have been excited to work with us and moving some of that forward. This is a picture of Pala's vineyard, and in this case, a very minor opportunity that's already being implemented over there is just a solar power weather station. and this, makes sense from an environmental standpoint, but, there's not power on site. And so a lot of environmental impacts and unnecessary energy usage in terms of, running a wire over to this facility just to the one that has a relatively low energy use, although watering certainly is going to use some energy here as well. Okay, so then once you've identified your opportunities and you really identify all that you can, I mean, this is going to be an iterative process as you go further, or even in the future, you'll identify new opportunities. So you want to come back to this. All these steps are to be repeated on an ongoing basis, but you need to kind of do your first cut at all these things. Is really prioritizing and selecting opportunities for further analysis. And Michael really kind of touched upon this, I think, very well in the beginning. This is really applying your energy goals. What does the business, the community, the leadership, what do they value most? What's going to be really kind of primary and secondary and beyond that in terms of making these decisions? You could really have kind of a rubric of your energy goals for each opportunity, and self-score them yourself. I mean, how much money is it going to cost? How much money is it going to save? How much energy are you going to reduce? What are the level of emissions you're going to reduce? Is it going to support resilience? How much is it going to support resilience? Is it going to increase your self-sufficiency? Is it going to create jobs, other local economic benefits? So, you really, your goal setting is really also creating your evaluation criteria that you come back and apply to those opportunities that you evaluate. And you kind of take your first cut at a very high level in terms of what you know during that preliminary analysis. And this is a picture of the Pala RV resort. And in this case, there isn't really a ton of energy use going on. There's lighting for the whole facility, and then they have a pool here. So, heating the pool and pumping the water here, and pumping water throughout for landscaping are really going to be the primary energy uses, aside from the actual RVs plugging in too. There's going to be stations for them to plug in at. But then, I'll let Michael kind of chime in a little bit after I, kind of get through this particular process. Is, you've prioritized from your preliminary analysis and really kind of triage what do you want to do your advanced analysis for. Knowing that advanced analysis takes time and resources to do, you want to take kind of a high level approach to them, see if you can eliminate or at least order them initially, and then identify 1, 2, 3 or more, depending on how much resources and time you have available to dedicate to this analysis. But it's really some of the same types of things we've already mentioned in terms of actually conducting that analysis. You may not use some of the tools like Energy Toolbase or Helioscope during that first cut, but you may come back to it during that second cut. But I think you're going to want to, to the extent that it's really a high priority and seeming like a potentially worthwhile opportunity, you want to see if you can conduct an investment grade analysis. I mean, what really is it going to cost? What is it really going to save? You don't want to be in a position where you're promising or over-promising benefits that you find out that the tribe has invested so much money and they're not saving the type of money that they have expected. That's not going to make you look good. That's not going to make anybody happy. And then part of that analysis too is identifying how you're going to fund it. I mean, the preliminary, I would say your first cut really, you can consider that, but I think, I'd prioritize opportunities before you consider funding, and then you may reprioritize then once you actually consider where you can get funding for these opportunities. I mean, solar investments and kind of energy generation investments tend to be very expensive, and I find for tribal projects, you tend to need grants and other funding sources to make them successful. And so, you then can reapply that criteria once you've done this advanced analysis to see if that moves things or reorders where you would want to invest your time and effort and money in what you present to your decision makers. Michael, what else are we going to want to consider here for that advanced analysis?
Well, I mean, I wanted to point out, and it goes to this, but I'm not quite answering your question. You mentioned funding sources and talked about grants. That leaves on the table third-party financing, especially that's tied to tax credits because that's the way a lot of renewable energy investments and some conservation investments have been financed, is tied to investments that are tax benefit for the investor. For tribes, that raises some particular questions and complexities. In the past, I think most tribes have assumed, and it's been generally speaking the rule, that tribes can't take advantage of tax credit financing. In recent years, that's actually been changing. The IRS made some changes in the rules where it is possible for tribes to take advantage of tax benefit financing. Even though the tribe is not a tax-paying entity, even though they're a sovereign entity, a third party can make investments in assets and own those and take the tax benefits and in effect pass those through to the tribe and be a third party source of funding for that. So it's not as easy, and there aren't as many sources of that funding as there are for sort of the traditional for-profit space as opposed to tribes. So it's kind of a nascent area, that is, the third party financing based on tax credits for tribal investments, but it is out there. And that goes really to the need for that investment grade analysis, because if you've got a solid project with a really bankable funding stream, then it's going to be much easier to find that kind of tax credit based financing than it is for a project that doesn't have those kinds of features.
Yeah, and we're looking into this right now for the Rincon microgrid projects, and it's there's a series of grants and even rebates. So you also want to look into state and local grant funding and rebate opportunities, and we're leveraging those right now significantly. But if you can bring in the tax equity benefits, the investment tax credit, depreciation that a tribal government can't directly take advantage of, or a tribal businesses that's non-tax liable entity, it can be 30, 40, 50% of the project costs may be eligible depending on how much of those are renewable energy resources or tied to renewable energy resources. So it's definitely an important thing to consider, even if you receive the grants. We have a DOE grant, and there are some opportunities to actually get DOE grant funding and still partner with a third party and take advantage of tax equity. John, is there anything else you want to add to the advanced analysis slide?
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as technical assistance, I know you put state, local agencies. We worked with RCAC, Rural Community Assistance Corporation, to do an energy audit of our water system back in 2013. RCAC works a lot with potable water systems, so you might want to talk to them about, that was at no cost too, and they did a really good analysis on it with us on that. We've also used interns to help with some of our energy analysis and writing some sort of reports and stuff. So, if you have colleges nearby, you might want to try to connect with your local college and see if they have any students, that are into energy as part of their degree or program, and see if they have to do some sort of report or anything like that, like a thesis, and maybe, try to team up with a grad student or an undergrad student to work with you on this. We did that, and that was pretty successful. And then as far as funding, yeah, Josh, you hit the nail on the head with all the funding areas to look at. I can't really see anything else on there that I would recommend looking at.
Thanks, John. So this is a picture of Pala's groves, and in particular, this is one of their meters, and down below it's a little harder to see as some of their water infrastructure. The primary energy load at the groves is water pumping for irrigation, and they've actually already taken advantage of SDG&E programs to install more efficient well pumps. So not only will that save, installing well pumps saves them more money operationally on an ongoing basis, fairly significant. There tends to be utility rebate programs where they will give you some money back for installing these as well. And in this case, they had somebody from SDG&E come out, evaluate all of their pumps, and identify new pumps and rebates they could take advantage of to install them. So here's kind of the final 3 steps that we won't go into too much detail because they're fairly obvious and kind of consistent across the board. You know, presenting those analysis results and initial plans to key stakeholders. Ultimately, you need their buy-in and support to proceed with these, and that will go possibly hand in hand with the P2 assessment report. We provide the details. A lot of times I find decision makers aren't going to necessarily read those reports in detail. They're going to need kind of a executive summary, high-level analysis that shows them the costs and benefits of each particular initiative so they can evaluate and see what the investment is and what the payback is going to be on that investment. And you also want to address whatever their goals and other concerns are going to be. But you really want to get this all documented in an assessment report so you're not reinventing the wheel down the road a year later, 5 years later, or beyond. You want to kind of maintain this analysis and these findings so that as you continue to evaluate these opportunities, you're not redoing what you've already done. And then you really do need to translate this into an action plan or some type of planning document where you have tasks and subtasks, you have roles and responsibilities, who's going to implement these and within what time frames, what are going to be those outputs and deliverables, and most importantly, what types of performance metrics, what type of cost savings, what types of energy savings are you expecting, and how are you going to track and demonstrate that you've realized those savings if you do implement these measures. And it could be something like EnergyStar Portfolio Manager that you can link to your utility accounts, possibly if that is an option for you, that shows you from year to year, you've implemented these new energy efficiency measures. And after that year, the next year, you found that you reduced your energy consumption by 20% and saved, 20 or 30% on your electric bill. But there's a variety of ways you can track and report that. And then you want to have this be a living plan. You can come back and as you implement measures, what's the next priority? What's the next low-hanging fruit? What are the new opportunities that presented themselves? This is a picture of the Woods Valley Golf Club, and I think we're going to transition now into case studies. But Michael, anything else to add for the planning process before we wrap it up with the case studies? We have about 8 minutes left, and I don't see any other questions, so we'll just kind of go with the presentation till the end. I do encourage anybody to put their questions in the chat box if you want to have any questions answered before we conclude.
I think you pretty much hit it as far as those planning steps goes. There were some things that we were talking about earlier offline before the call about unintended consequences or some sort of pitfalls and lessons learned, things like that. Would this be a good time to go into that? Or should we,
well, that's the last slide.
Oh, okay.
So, well, yeah, we'll kind of briefly cover the strategies being implemented or considered at San Pasqual and Pala, and then so at San Pasqual, we're talking about the Woods Valley Golf Club, and kind of the primary opportunities for energy we've identified are energy efficient replacement equipment, ones that use potentially alternative fuels, but energy efficient replacement of equipment is mostly going to be the well pumps. Are there more efficient well pumps that we can be using than the ones that are currently installed? Alternative cleaner vehicles, either from the maintenance yard or in the golf carts themselves, and the golf carts are already electric, so that's already obviously beneficial depending on the source of energy for those. Load shifting is an opportunity to the extent that it's not being utilized already. Can we pump at different times where energy is less expensive and then also correspondingly typically has a lower environmental impact? They do not currently have solar, so we're looking into options for them to install solar to combine with energy storage as an independent system that could provide backup power, peak shaving, and load shifting, but also to tie to their golf carts that are using electricity right now to be charged as well. And then utility rate schedule changes is not something that's going to lead to pollution prevention benefits, but anytime you're doing an energy analysis, the utilities are changing their rate schedules all the time. And if they don't volunteer that you are eligible for a lower cost rate, you typically need to look this up yourself. SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, has a rate analysis tool on their web portal that you can use, and it tells you, includes your projected savings per year. And I've used this for both San Pasqual and Pala and found several accounts that could save, I think, combine, almost $100,000 between accounts just shifting to different rate schedules without changing anything else. And then this is was actually an example from San Pasqual, where for the microgrid related project of an energy saving opportunity is just kind of, controlling energy can be significant. If you're able to better control your heating and ventilation, heating and air conditioning systems, you may be overusing them right now due to the amount of control you have. On this left, we have kind of a dated thermostat energy control system. On the right, we have a Nest thermostat, which can actually sense ambient temperature outdoors and different. You can program it to a greater degree, and it's going to pull in more data that can help your building operate more efficiently. John, do you have anything you want to add for some of San Pasqual's energy measures?
No, the big ones are mainly water conservation, which would lead to energy conservation for pumping. The golf carts are a big one. We are looking into solar. The hard part with solar on a golf course is, a golf course is very large, but solar and golf balls don't really mix, so we're kind of limited on where we can deploy it, mainly just to the parking lot and a few fringe areas. So that's one of our challenges with, deploying solar on the golf course. The utility rate schedule changes have been helpful, like Josh mentioned, and that's really, pretty easy to do, going forward. But yeah, that's about it, really.
Thanks, John. For Pala, this is, kind of across the board to a certain degree of all the facilities. Energy conservation, again, I think particularly at the casino, it's a large operation with a lot of customers and a lot of employees. Just some education and awareness about how energy is being used and changing behaviors can have a pretty significant impact. So, again, make sure you're prioritizing that, and you want to reduce your consumption from actual usage first and foremost. It's going to be the most cost-effective thing to do. Then proceeding to energy efficiency, they've already extensively looked at and retrofitted lighting to particularly LED lighting. There's HVAC is, again, probably one of maybe the most significant loads they have at those facilities. And there are a variety of systems and retrofits that they've already considered and implemented. Water pumps throughout the facilities. They have their pools, but water is being pumped everywhere. That's another significant energy load. There are a lot of restaurants there, so refrigeration of food is an area where there's some opportunities for energy cost saving. That and over at the Pala Mini Mart, and water heating. And that kind of, the next bullet's the natural gas versus propane. Right now they're on propane. They're not too far from a natural gas source. Natural gas isn't that much cleaner, but it is more clean and it's more cost effective than propane. There could be worthwhile to make an investment in running the line a little further down the road and then retrofitting the equipment. Well, we talked about building energy management, and at the casino in particular and wastewater treatment plant, there's going to be way more sophisticated building energy management controls that they're already implementing and utilizing there to control when and how energy is used throughout the facilities. At both San Pasqual and Pala, we are looking heavily into solar and energy storage systems, including microgrids that are going to provide not just cleaner sources of energy, but also resilience to protect them against outages. Both reservations are in high fire threat districts and subject to regular and extended outages. Electric vehicles and chargers are an opportunity, and I think that is going to just become a greater and greater demand. It's an opportunity for both serving and having infrastructure for your customers, but also for your fleet vehicles to potentially save money. And one thing you can do too, I talked about audits. At Pala, we had a retro commissioning study, kind of an initial analysis done. They found that they're actually doing a lot already, so they weren't going to go into more depth because they didn't find they were going to find additional low-hanging fruit. But there's usually, when you install these things, usually a commissioning process that's done to ensure that your system is operating the way it's supposed to, that's actually saving the energy and that it's supposed to. And if that's not done, you could install a new solar and storage system or a new energy efficiency measure, and then it's not actually saving the energy that you expected because it just wasn't programmed correctly or installed correctly. Another thing that's not going to save things environmentally is direct access. You can directly procure your electricity rather than buying it through retail, through your utility. We talked about alternative rate schedules, and we already talked about, I think, a variety of grants and rebates that are available. A lot of these I have on the board here are particular to California, but I would check with your local utility about opportunities there. So Michael, I'd say let's take our last minute to kind of go through challenges and lessons learned. I'm going to just kind of breeze through this list pretty quickly. We've already gotten into resilience and self-sufficiency as being key goals and why that is now in much detail. Energy investments can be significant, but the return, energy is costly, and so is water. And if you can, these investments can be very much worthwhile. You got to run the analysis. I do find that this area of P2 can be a bit easier to quantify and share the information. I already discussed how building energy data can be a little easier to analysis than transportation data just because of the way it's tracked. I want to just say everybody's busy, particularly facilities managers who are going to be your kind of key partners here. So you want to be respectful and efficient with their time, ensuring you're not taking up too much of it. So just that's, through all of your analysis and just a good life lesson, I suppose, in general. And I did find this in working with Pala Casino's facilities manager at one point. Michael, I'll let you kind of touch upon this as a closing point on strategic planning, but there's a lot of tools and resources available we've already touched upon. So Michael, you want to kind of talk about strategic planning and analysis and any other point to close?
Well, I feel like maybe I've kind of beat that horse pretty well earlier in the call. So maybe okay. I'd rather chime in on one other point maybe that bears making. That is that policies, especially at the state level, but at the federal level as well, are kind of complex and they are evolving. Like they're continually changing. And there are certain things, especially about state policies and utility policies, that can trip you up that, are a little obscure. Things like fuel switching policies within energy conservation programs, load departure fees, standby rates that utilities can charge, those kinds of things. If you're not factoring those into your plans, the economic outcome of investments can be really thrown off. So it's important to keep abreast of changes that are happening in those policies and to really keep on top of them and understand what they are.
One quick example before we go is net metering in California. It used to, if you sent energy back to the grid, they give you retail rates. I think even beyond, if you overproduced, and they made some changes to the policy, and they also, they made some changes to the time of use policies where it's just not as profitable to, solar projects aren't quite as profitable now as they were then, at least, from getting money back from the utility. So yeah, you just have to factor this in terms of what's possibly going to happen. You may not always know, but important thing to consider. So, all right. So just,
if I can just add one thing to that too, is obviously, and this seems kind of, I don't know, it just seems kind of like obvious, but also know what utility you're in, what type of utility. Are you an investor-owned utility versus a non-IOU? That plays a critical role in California as far as what you can and can't do. And know what your utility will support and won't support before you get going, what they're going to try to fight you on, what they might support you on. Because you may have an idea and the numbers may make sense to build like a 10 megawatt solar farm, but is your utility going to allow you to come on and connect and interconnect into the system? So, they're kind of the gatekeepers to all of this. So knowing what they will and will not support is critical in your success going forward.
Good point. Thanks, John. So just, I've already gone through this. I encourage you again, hopefully you'll join us for the last 2 webinars and share this with others. And with that, we'll wrap up now. I don't see any questions to answer. And I just want to thank everybody who contributed, Michael, John, Brendan. Thank you, Jessica and Scott, for joining us as well. All of you who came or participated. And this webinar is recorded and will be posted along with the slides, and additional resources will be posted in the coming weeks as well. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great day.